Welcome to Celery Bog Nature Area. This video will give you an understanding of where the name originated and give you a history of the bog. Let's start from the beginning. For the past 2.5 million years, the climate of the Northern Hemisphere has fluctuated between conditions of warm and cold. The last cycle of climate cooling, popularly known as the Ice Age, started about 110,000 years ago and lasted until about 10,000 BC, when it finally melted in Canada. During this Ice Age period, northern and eastern Canada received massive amounts of snowfall and remained below freezing most of the year. Year after year, the layers of unmelted snow continued to compact into dense ice layers. Ultimately, these great masses of ice began to flow outward and south under the stress of their own weight. This gigantic continental glacier, known as the Wisconsin Glacier, which could have been as much as a mile thick, pushed its way through 2/3 of Indiana. It is during this time that the woolly mammoth and mastodons could be seen living in this area. The glacier acted like a huge bulldozer, and this sliding motion caused a great amount of soil erosion, carving out large holes and valleys while pushing rock and soil hundreds or thousands of miles. During this process, large blocks of ice broke off and were pushed into the ground under the enormous weight of the glacier. As the climate cycled back to warmer temperatures, the glacier began to melt, starting at its southernmost point. Eventually, what was left are the land formations that we see today. As the buried ice blocks melted, they formed what are called kettle lakes. The Celery Bog Nature Area wetland and nearby Hadley Lake are two examples of these. The Wisconsin Glacier melted from this part of the state about 14 to 16,000 years ago, leaving the 100-acre Kettle Lake on this property. It was rather deep at that time, around 40 feet, and had a variety of fish and plants. Over the next 3,000 or 4,000 years, this Kettle Lake filled in with dead plant material and became a shallow marsh. During an additional 3,000 or 4,000 years, the marsh transformed into a bog with sphagnum peat moss in the water. Eventually, there was about 30 feet of peat moss that filled up the basin, and it remained that way for many years to come. Let's fast forward to the early 1900s. During this time in history, farming was expanding very rapidly, and there was a need for more land to grow crops, so wetlands all over the country were drained using underground clay tile. The bog here was also drained, exposing the rich peat soil. At the same time, in the 1920s, immigrants from Holland were coming to the area looking for ground to rent to grow vegetables and crops. They saw this land and it reminded them of the soils they had just left in the Netherlands, so they settled here. These families grew all types of vegetables and crops in the peat soil. One year, the whole area was flooded and they were forced to concentrate on growing celery, which required constant wet soil that this area could provide. They continued to grow celery on this land for about 50 years. On the back of the television stand, you will see why this celery was so special. Around 1970, the underground drainage tile eventually became clogged or broken, and water started rising in the fields. This made it impossible to raise crops, so farming in the area had to stop. By this time, the original bog environment had changed so much that it never returned to what it was before the farming. It was simply a marsh or a wetland. The shallow water that remained was ideal for the growth of cattails, which covered a large section of the wetlands. This was a great environment for muskrats, but not much else. In 2004, a dam was added along Cumberland Avenue that raised the water level, which greatly reduced the cattails. As a result, there was more open water, ideal for the many resident and migratory birds, which is what we have today. A 100-acre marsh for turtles, frogs, fish, microorganisms, insects, and a wide variety of birds. Now you know how this nature area got its name. At one time, the wetlands were a bog, and celery was grown here by farmers. You have just seen and heard the geological history of Celery Bog from the Ice Age right up to the present. Make sure you check out the mastodon and mammoth exhibit right in front of you. Woolly mammoths and mastodons lived in this area during the last Ice Age. As you leave this nature center, you're going to enter the outdoor classroom. Just try for a moment to imagine what this area looked like 10,000 years ago to 100 years ago. In the meantime, thanks for listening, thanks for watching, and enjoy Celery Bog.